Oh, hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't you mind the old grandfather clock ticking away in the hall? It's been the soundtrack of my life for as long as I can remember. It's a comforting sound, steady, reliable. Let me just pour you a cup. There now. Earl Grey, with a little slice of lemon, just how you like it. The rain is starting to patter against the window panes, a lovely, soft sound. Perfect for a chat. I was just sitting here, watching the steam curl up from my cup and my hand. Oh, this old, wrinkled hand of mine, brushed against the locket I always wear. It's been my constant companion for, goodness, nearly 70 years now. It's just a simple, silver oval, a little worn down at the edges from a lifetime of touch. Most people probably wouldn't look at it twice. But its weight, oh, its weight is more than just silver. It holds the heaviest thing I've ever had to carry, a promise. You know, dear, I was just stirring my tea this morning, one sugar, just like always when I caught sight of my reflection in the spoon. These old hands, they've held so much, and that's when I remembered the day everything changed. It was 1952, a crisp autumn afternoon, and I was standing on a chilly train platform with a heart full of hope and a decision that would either build my world or tear it down. But the story doesn't start there. Not really. To understand the weight of that promise, you have to understand the world it was born into. My world, it was a world painted in the warm, golden colors of childhood. We lived in a small house with a sprawling garden my mother adored. The air, back then, always seemed to be filled with the scent of baking bread and roses. My father was a kind man, with a laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters and hands that were calloused from his work at the mill, but gentle enough to fix my doll's broken arm. And then there was Leo, my little brother. He was 5 years my junior, a whirlwind of scraped knees, mischievous grins, and untamable sandy hair. He was my shadow, my confidant, my greatest annoyance, and my fiercest protector, all rolled into one. I was the responsible one, the one who'd make sure his shirt was tucked in for school photos. He was the dreamer, the one who'd tell me stories of faraway lands he'd read about in his adventure books. We were two halves of the same whole, inseparable. In that sun-drenched world, there was also Arthur. He lived 3 houses down. He wasn't like the other boys who'd pull your pigtails. Arthur was quiet, thoughtful, with eyes the color of the summer sky. He didn't just see me, he saw me. He saw the girl who loved to sketch faces in her notebook more than she loved to gossip. He'd bring me wildflowers from the meadow behind his house, their stems still damp with dew. The summer I turned 17 was the summer Arthur gave me this locket. We were sitting under the old willow tree by the creek, the fireflies just beginning to wake up and blink in the twilight. He pressed the cool silver into my palm. "It's empty, Ellie," he said, his voice soft. "For now, it's for a picture of us. For the future, a future." Oh, what a glorious word that was. It felt as vast and shimmering as the sky above us. My future was a scholarship to the art college in the city. It was a little studio with a big window, canvases smelling of turpentine and possibility. It was letters from Arthur, who was going to study engineering. It was a life we would build, brick by brick, promise by promise. The locket wasn't just a gift, it was a blueprint. It was the first brick. I remember holding it, the silver cool against my warm skin, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. Life was perfect, stable, as predictable and comforting as the ticking of that old clock in the hall. We thought we had forever. But that's the thing about life, dear. You never know when the pendulum is about to swing in a direction you could never have imagined. The swing came on a Tuesday in October. It was a day just like any other. I'd walked home from my part-time job at the library, the scent of burning leaves in the air. Leo was supposed to be home from school, and I expected to find him raiding the biscuit tin. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. There was a strange car parked out front, a black one that seemed to soak up the afternoon light. The silence inside was cold, heavy. It clung to the furniture, to the curtains. 2 police officers were in the sitting room. I'll never forget the look on their faces. It was a mixture of pity and a kind of sterile duty. There had been an accident, a motor car collision on the way back from my aunt's house. My parents, they were both gone. Just like that. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds hanging in the air, meaningless and cruel. I remember sinking onto the bottom step of the staircase, the world tilting on its axis. The warm, golden world I knew had shattered into a million tiny, sharp pieces, and in that deafening silence, I heard a small sound from the kitchen. It was Leo. He was standing by the back door, his school bag dropped at his feet, his face pale and blotchy. He was just a boy, 13 years old. And in his eyes, I saw a terror that mirrored my own. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the future I had dreamed of, the art school, the studio, the life with Arthur, evaporated. A new future took its place, one that was terrifyingly unclear. All I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, was that I was all he had left. The locket around my neck suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The promise it held for my future with Arthur was overshadowed by a new, unspoken promise to my brother. A promise to be his rock, his shield, his everything. I didn't know it then, standing in the wreckage of my world. But that promise would demand more from me than I ever thought I had to give. The days that followed are a blur, a gray, formless fog of quiet condolences and casserole dishes left on the doorstep. People were kind, oh, terribly kind. They'd pat my arm and say, "You're so strong, Eleanor," but I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, like a gourd scraped clean for Halloween. Strength was just the mask I wore because I had to. For Leo, he didn't cry, not at first. He just became quiet. The boisterous boy who'd filled the house with the sound of his imaginary adventures was gone. In his place was a silent, watchful shadow who moved through the rooms of our home as if he were a ghost. I'd find him just staring at our father's empty armchair or holding one of our mother's gardening gloves, his small fingers tracing the worn leather. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a gaping wound. It was the sound of everything we had lost. The funeral was a sea of black coats and hushed whispers under a steel-gray sky. Arthur stood beside me, his hand a warm, solid presence on the small of my back. He was my anchor in that storm, the one person who didn't offer platitudes. He just stood with me, sharing the silence. Afterwards, back at the house that felt too big and too empty, he found me in the kitchen. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," he whispered, and his voice was so full of genuine pain that it finally broke something in me. I cried then, cried for my parents, for Leo, for the girl I was just a week ago. He just held me, letting me soak the shoulder of his good suit jacket. A few weeks later, the letters began to arrive. One was the official acceptance from the art college, the scholarship confirmed. It was printed on thick, creamy paper. Holding it felt like holding a ghost. I read the words over and over. The dream I had cherished now feeling like a cruel joke. How could I go to the city? How could I leave Leo? He was my legal responsibility now, a fact the family solicitor had made painfully clear. My aunt offered to take him, but she had 5 children of her own, in a cramped little house. And when I looked at Leo, his eyes wide and fearful at the very suggestion, I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't break us apart. We were the only home we had left, that night. I took the acceptance letter and the beautiful glossy brochure for the college, and I burned them in the metal dustbin in the back garden. I watched the flames curl around the images of smiling students and sunlit studios, turning my future to ash. It was a strangely calm act, a surrender. Arthur found me there, the orange glow of the fire dancing in his worried eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Letting it go," I said, not looking at him. "I can't go, Arthur. I can't leave him." He didn't argue, he understood. But the understanding didn't make it any less painful. We stood there for a long time, the space between us filled with the things we couldn't say. The future we had planned, the one that was supposed to fill the empty locket, was dissolving like smoke. The first big change was selling the house. It was too big, too expensive, and filled with too many memories that hurt to look at. We moved to a small, 2-bedroom flat above a bakery on the other side of town. The constant, cloying smell of sugar and yeast was a poor substitute for my mother's roses. Our new life was cramped and colorless. I got a full-time job as a secretary at a solicitor's office, the very one that handled our parents' affairs. It was monotonous work, typing and filing, the clatter of the typewriter a constant reminder of the art I wasn't making. Leo hated the new flat. He hated the new school. He hated the city smells and the noisy neighbors. He started spending more and more time out of the house, staying out until dusk. The quiet boy from the first few weeks was replaced by a simmering, angry one. Our conversations became clipped and functional. "Did you do your homework?" "Yes." "Where were you?" "Out." The money was tight. Oh dear, it was so tight. I learned to stretch a pound further than I ever thought possible. I mended our clothes until the patches had patches. I learned to make soup from almost nothing. Every penny was counted, every shilling allocated. The dream of a studio was replaced by the reality of a leaking faucet. The freedom of an artist was replaced by the burden of bills. One evening, Arthur came to visit. He was about to leave for university. He brought me a small, wrapped gift. It was a set of charcoal pencils and a beautiful, leather-bound sketchbook. "So you don't forget who you are," he said softly. I wanted to thank him, to tell him how much it meant, but the gesture just highlighted everything I had lost. A wave of bitterness, sharp and unexpected, washed over me. "What's the point, Arthur?" I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. "When would I ever have time to use these? Between the cooking and the cleaning and making sure Leo doesn't get into trouble, when is there time for sketching?" The hurt in his eyes was immediate. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I just thought." "Well, you thought wrong," I said, turning away, unable to bear the sight of his pain. He left soon after that. The sketchbook sat on the little mantelpiece, unopened, for a long time. A monument to a life I couldn't have. Our letters became less frequent after that. His were full of new experiences, new friends, the excitement of his studies. Mine were full of the dull, gray reality of my life. What could I write about? The rising cost of potatoes. The argument I'd had with Leo about his grades. The distance between our worlds grew wider with every passing week, until the letters stopped altogether. One day, I took the sketchbook and tucked it away in the back of my wardrobe, behind old blankets. It was easier not to see it. It was easier not to remember, but the locket, that I could never take off. It remained, a cold, constant weight against my skin, a silent reminder of every promise I was struggling to keep. And I was beginning to fear I was failing at all of them. Years have a way of slipping by, you know. They don't always march past. Sometimes they just sort of seep away, like water into dry ground. Before I knew it, 5 years had passed since we'd moved into that little flat above the bakery. I was in my early 20s, but I felt much older. My world had shrunk to the size of that flat, the solicitor's office, and the path between them. The vibrant girl who loved to draw had been replaced by a tired young woman who knew more about legal documents than she did about art. Leo was 18 now. He wasn't a boy anymore, but a young man, and oh dear, he was a stranger to me. The bond we once shared, that easy, unspoken connection, had frayed into a thin, taut wire of obligation and resentment. He was handsome. I could see that. He had our father's height and our mother's charming smile, when he chose to use it. But there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A defensive shield he kept up against the world, and especially against me. He'd finished school, just barely, and worked odd jobs here and there. A bit of laboring at a building site, a few weeks helping out at the docks. Nothing ever stuck. He was restless, constantly searching for something I couldn't provide. Excitement, maybe, or freedom. He'd come home late, smelling of smoke and the stale beer of the pubs he was now old enough to frequent. He had a new set of friends, lads with slicked back hair and a swagger that set my teeth on edge. They'd mutter a greeting if they saw me, their eyes sliding away as if they couldn't quite meet my gaze. Our flat became a battleground, not of loud, shouting matches, but of tense silences and slammed doors. I'd ask where he was going. He'd say, "Out." I'd ask when he'd be back. He'd shrug and say, "Later." Every question felt like an accusation to him. Every piece of advice I tried to offer was perceived as a criticism. "You should be thinking about a proper trade." "Leo," I'd say, trying to keep my voice even. "Something steady. Don't tell me what to do, Ellie." He'd shoot back, his jaw tight. "You're not my mother." And that was the sentence that always cut the deepest. He was right. I wasn't. I was his sister, trying to wear shoes that were far too big for me. I was trying to be a parent, a provider, a guide, and in the process, I had forgotten how to simply be his sister. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, and it made me hard. I saw him not as my grieving little brother, but as a problem to be solved, a life to be managed. By the way, dear, this part of the story always makes me feel a bit lonely. It makes me wonder about all the different lives being lived out there right now. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little friendlier. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, the cracks. They were getting wider. The money I'd scraped together would sometimes go missing from the tin in the kitchen. Just a few shillings at first, then a pound note. When I confronted him, he'd deny it with such ferocious anger that I'd end up backing down. Exhausted by the prospect of another fight, I felt like I was failing. Failing my parents, failing him. The promise I made to their memory felt like a lead weight in my gut. The turning point, or what I thought was the turning point, came one Thursday evening. Leo came home earlier than usual. He was agitated, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. He wouldn't look at me. "What is it, Leo?" I asked, my heart beginning to thump in that familiar, anxious way. He finally stopped and faced me, his face pale. "I'm in trouble, Ellie, real trouble." It turned out he and his friends had borrowed a car for a joyride. A foolish, stupid act, but someone had seen them, and the police were involved. Worse, Leo had been holding on to a small sum of money for one of the older lads, a boy named Vince who had a reputation for being quick with his fists. The money was supposed to be for a bet, and Leo had lost it. He owed Vince £20. £20. In 1959, that might as well have been 1,000. It was more than a month's rent. It was an impossible sum. "I don't have it," I whispered, sinking into a chair. The room felt like it was closing in on me. "Vince says he'll get it from me one way or another," Leo mumbled, his bravado gone, replaced by the raw fear of a boy. "He gave me until Saturday." I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I looked at our finances, at the pathetic little sum in my savings account at the bank. It wasn't nearly enough. Selling what few possessions we had of value wouldn't even come close. I felt a cold, hard knot of despair in my stomach. I saw my brother's future spiraling away, a police record, a dangerous debt. I saw all my years of sacrifice, of scrimping and saving and biting my tongue, amounting to nothing. On Saturday morning, I walked to the one place I had been avoiding for years, a small, respectable pawn shop on a corner I never went down, and, in my handbag, wrapped in a silk handkerchief my mother had given me, were the last 2 things of real value I owned: my mother's gold wedding band and my father's silver pocket watch. My hands were trembling as I placed them on the counter. The man behind the glass barely looked at me as he weighed them, his face impassive. He named a price. It was just enough. Leaving that shop, I felt like I had shed another layer of my own skin. I walked through the streets in a daze. The money, a heavy, shameful lump in my coat pocket. I had saved him, yes, but I had sold the last tangible pieces of our parents to do it. The cracks in our little family weren't just widening, a chasm was opening up between us, and I was afraid it was one we could never hope to cross. Handing that money to Leo was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I didn't lecture him. I didn't shout. I was too empty for that. I just pressed the folded notes into his hand and said, "This is it, Leo. There's nothing left. You have to pay him back, and you have to promise me you'll stay away from Vince and that crowd." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked ashamed. Truly he did. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd look at me with remorse after breaking a vase. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the rock bottom he needed to hit to finally change his path. For a few weeks, it seemed like I was right. Leo was subdued, quiet. He came home straight after his shifts at a new job, helping a grocer with deliveries. He ate the dinners I cooked without complaint. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't as hostile. It was a fragile truce, a period of careful navigation around our shared trauma. I started to breathe a little easier. I even dared to feel a sliver of peace. But peace, I've learned, can be a fickle guest. One evening, about a month after the incident, I was darning a hole in one of Leo's work shirts when he came into the living room, dressed in his best trousers and a clean shirt. "I'm going out," he announced, not looking at me. My heart sank. "Out where, Leo?" "It's a Wednesday night, just out with some mates," he said, a defensive edge creeping back into his voice. I recognized the tone immediately. Is it with Vince?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He spun around, his face a mask of fury. "Why are you always on my back, Ellie? You think because you bailed me out, you own me. I paid the man back. It's done with." "It's not done with if you're still seeing him." I stood up, the darning needle and thread falling from my lap. My own voice started to rise, fueled by fear and years of frustration. "That man is trouble, Leo. Can't you see that? What do you think Dad would say if he saw you throwing your life away with people like that? It was the wrong thing to say. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew it. Mentioning our father was a low blow, and his reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Dad's not here, he roared, his voice cracking. And neither is Mum. You think I don't know that? You think I don't live with that every single day? He took a step towards me, his finger jabbing the air. You stand there, acting so perfect, so saintly, with your miserable job and your miserable flat. You think I like living like this? You think I asked for you to be my keeper? Every word was a punch to the gut. I gave up everything for you. I choked out, the words tasting like acid. Everything. My art, my future. I never asked you to, he shouted back, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and deep, deep pain. I never asked you to be a martyr, Ellie. Maybe if you'd gone to your precious art school, you wouldn't be so bitter and twisted now. Maybe we'd both be better off. The cruelty of it stole my breath. All the sacrifices, all the worry, all the sleepless nights he was throwing them back in my face as if they were chains I had used to bind him. The fragile truce was shattered. The hope I'd nurtured withered and died in the heat of his anger. I saw in that moment that he didn't see my sacrifice as an act of love. He saw it as a burden, an accusation. I hate you, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I had never said anything so vile in my life, and the moment I said it, the air in the room went cold and still. The anger drained from Leo's face, replaced by a look of profound shock, then a deep, unreadable hurt. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth slightly open. He didn't say another word. He just turned, walked to the front door, and wrenched it open. The sound of that door slamming shut echoed through the tiny flat. It wasn't just a loud noise, it was a sound of finality. It was the sound of a connection being severed, of a chasm becoming a canyon. I stood there, trembling, in the sudden, ringing silence. The words, "I hate you," hung in the air between us, a poison that I couldn't take back. I sank to the floor, my legs unable to hold me. I wrapped my arms around myself and sobbed. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but wrenching, ugly sobs of complete and utter failure. I had lost him. In trying to hold on so tightly, to steer his life and protect him, I had pushed him away completely. The promise I had made to my parents lay in ruins at my feet. The boy I had vowed to protect was gone, and in his place was a man who saw me as his jailer. The weight of the locket on my chest was unbearable, a cold, mocking reminder of a life that was never lived, and a love that had just been destroyed. That night, lying awake and listening for a key in the lock that never came, I felt an emptiness so profound, I was sure it would swallow me whole. He didn't come home that night, or the next. The first 24 hours were a torment of anger and self-recrimination. My hateful words echoed in the silent flat. Every time I heard footsteps on the stairs, my heart would leap with a desperate hope, only to plummet back into the pit of my stomach when they continued past our door. The second day, the anger gave way to a cold, gnawing fear. Where was he? Was he safe? The city, which had always felt drab and monotonous, now seemed filled with hidden dangers. By the third day, I was frantic. I did something I never thought I would do. I went to the pub where I knew his friends, Vince's crowd, often gathered. It was a dark, smoky place that smelled of stale beer and regret. Walking in felt like stepping onto another planet. The men at the bar stopped talking and stared. I felt their eyes on me, judging, dismissing. I finally spotted Vince in a corner booth. I walked over, my hands trembling. "I'm looking for my brother," I said, my voice sounding small and thin. "Leo." Vince looked up at me slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. "Haven't seen him," he said, taking a long drag from his cigarette. Maybe he finally got tired of his big sister checking his nappies. His friends snickered. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread up my neck. I turned and walked out, my eyes stinging with tears. I had nowhere else to look. He was gone. The slamming of that door had been a final act. He had left, and he wasn't coming back. That weekend I walked around the flat like a ghost. His unmade bed, the shirt he'd left on a chair, they were like relics from another life. The loneliness was an oppressive physical presence. It was in that profound solitude that I finally hit rock bottom. I had nothing left. My parents were gone. The dream of my art was gone. Arthur was a distant memory, and now Leo was gone. My entire life had been built around that one promise to care for him, and I had failed so spectacularly that he had run from me. The foundation of my world had crumbled to dust. On Sunday afternoon, I couldn't bear the confines of the flat any longer. I put on my coat and just started walking, with no destination in mind. My feet, however, seemed to have a memory of their own. After an hour of aimless wandering, I found myself on the outskirts of my old town, standing on the path that led down to the creek, the place where Arthur had given me the locket. The old willow tree was still there, its branches thicker and lower than I remembered, weeping gracefully towards the slow-moving water. It was autumn, just as it had been when my world fell apart. The air was crisp and clean, a welcome relief from the city's grime. I sat down on the cool, damp earth under the willow's canopy, the place where I had once felt like the luckiest girl alive. I pulled the locket from under my collar. My thumb traced the worn, familiar oval. I thought of the girl who had received it, so full of hope and naive certainty. What would she think of me now? This tired, bitter woman who had driven her own brother away. The pain was so intense it was almost clarifying. I saw everything with a sudden, brutal honesty. Leo had been right. I had become a martyr. My sacrifice, which began as an act of pure love, had curdled over the years into a cudgel of resentment. I had held my lost dreams over his head like a silent accusation. I never once stopped to think about his grief, his loss. He hadn't just lost his parents. He'd lost his carefree childhood and, in a way, he'd lost his sister, too. She'd been replaced by a warden, a taskmaster, a constant, worried frown. I hadn't been sharing a burden with him. I had been his burden. Sitting there, under that ancient, patient tree, something inside me broke, but it wasn't the shattering of before. It was a different kind of breaking, the breaking of a dam, releasing a flood of understanding. The promise I made wasn't just to keep him safe and fed. The true promise, the one my parents would have wanted, was to love him. And love, true love, isn't about control or martyrdom. It's about forgiveness. It's about vulnerability. It's about admitting when you are wrong. I didn't know if I would ever see Leo again, but I knew that if I did, I couldn't be the same woman he had walked out on. I had to find a piece of that girl under the willow tree again. The girl who knew how to love without expectation. I went home. The flat was still quiet, still empty, but it felt different. The despair had been replaced by a sliver of purpose. I went to the back of my wardrobe and pulled out the dusty, untouched sketchbook Arthur had given me all those years ago. I unwrapped the charcoal pencils. My fingers felt clumsy at first as I opened to the first creamy, blank page. I didn't know what to draw, so I drew the only thing I could see in my mind's eye. I drew Leo's face, not the angry, resentful man who had slammed the door, but the boy with the scraped knees and the mischievous grin. I drew him from memory, the lines flowing with a surprising ease. Then I drew my mother's hands in her garden. My father's laugh, which was an impossible thing to draw, but I tried to capture it in the crinkle of his eyes. I drew for hours, page after page. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I wasn't trying to create a masterpiece for some far-off art school. I was just letting go. With every line, I felt a little bit of the bitterness, a little bit of the hardness, fall away. It was a conversation with my own soul. It was a prayer. I was finding my way back, not to the girl I was, but to someone new. Someone who understood that the greatest masterpiece isn't always on a canvas. Sometimes, it's in the messy, imperfect, and forgiving landscape of the human heart. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that was not tied to anyone else, but was entirely my own. The days that followed were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, a purposeful one. I kept my job at the solicitor's office. The bills still needed paying. After all but my evenings were transformed. The sketchbook was always open on the little kitchen table. Drawing became my solace, my way of processing the years of dammed-up emotion. It wasn't about becoming a great artist anymore. It was about becoming whole again. I drew the view from our window, the tired face of the baker downstairs, the play of light on a teacup. I found beauty in the small, ordinary things I had been blind to for so long. I had no idea where Leo was, and the not knowing was a constant, dull ache. But I stopped tormenting myself with worst-case scenarios. I had to let him go, in a way. I had to trust that the boy I raised, somewhere under that angry exterior, had a good heart and a strong will to survive. All I could do was change myself, and hope Hope that one day, somehow, our paths would cross again. About 2 months after he left, a letter arrived. It wasn't in a familiar envelope. The postmark was from Liverpool. My hands shook so badly, I could barely open it. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was Leo's. Ellie, it began. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things I said. You were right about Vince and the others. I took a train here with the last few quid I had. I didn't know where else to go. I got a job on the docks. Proper work. It's hard, but it's honest. I'm staying in a boarding house. It's not much, but it's a roof. That thing you said, it wasn't true. I know it's not. And the things I said were worse. I know what you gave up. I was just angry at everything. At them being gone. At us being stuck. Mostly at myself, that I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know I'm safe. And I'm sorry. Leo. I must have read that letter 100 times, the tears blurring the ink. He was safe, he was working, and he was sorry. The relief was so overwhelming, it made me dizzy. He had found his own way, not because I had pushed him, but because he had chosen to. He had needed to leave, to break free from the suffocating dynamic we had created, to become his own man. I sat down immediately and wrote back. I didn't fill the page with accusations or I told you so. I filled it with the truth I had discovered under the willow tree. I told him I was the one who was sorry. I was sorry for being a warden instead of a sister, for letting my own bitterness poison our home. I told him I was proud of him. I told him about the sketchbook, about how I was drawing again. I told him that the door was always, always open. And I told him that I loved him. We began to write to each other regularly after that. Our letters were cautious at first, feeling each other out, but slowly, the old warmth began to return. We wrote about our days, our work, the funny things we saw. We were getting to know each other again, not as guardian and ward, but as siblings, as equals. For the first time, we talked about our parents, sharing memories instead of just the pain of their absence. We were healing, separately, but together. A year later, he came home for a visit. I was nervous, waiting for him at the train station. Would it be awkward? Would the old tensions resurface? But the man who stepped off that train was different. He was leaner, stronger, with the confidence of someone who had weathered a storm and come out the other side. He was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He wrapped me in a hug that lifted me off my feet. It's good to be home, Ellie, he said into my hair, and for the first time, in a very long time, the little flat felt like a home again. He looked at my drawings, which I had pinned up on the walls, and he was amazed. You're brilliant, he said, his voice full of awe. You should have been doing this all along. I'm doing it now, I said, and I meant it. That visit was a new beginning for us. He went back to Liverpool, to his job and the life he was building, but the connection between us was restored, stronger and more honest than it had ever been. He had needed to break away to find himself, and I had needed him to leave so that I could find myself. A few years later, I even met someone, a kind, quiet widower named Frank who worked as a librarian. He loved my drawings and my quiet nature. He wasn't a grand, youthful passion like Arthur had been. He was a gentle, steady love, a comforting love. We married and lived a simple, happy life together. Leo was the best man at our wedding. I never did become a famous artist. I never had a grand studio, but I never stopped drawing. My art wasn't for galleries or critics. It was for me. It was for my family. It was the language of my heart. And in the end, that was more than enough. The promise of the locket, the one Arthur gave me, was for a future filled with love. It just wasn't the future I had planned. It was a different one, messier and more difficult, but real. And the other promise, the one I made in silence to my parents, had finally been fulfilled. Not by controlling my brother's life, but by finally learning to love him with an open hand, letting him find his own way back to me. So you see, dear, this little silver locket is more than just a piece of jewelry. It's a map of my life. It's marked with the crossroads I faced, the wrong turns I took, and the long, winding path that finally led me home. Not to a place, but to a feeling of peace. Leo did wonderfully for himself. The hard work on the docks taught him discipline and his natural charm. The charm he got from our mother eventually led him into a sales job. He was a natural. He met a lovely girl from Liverpool, a nurse named Mary, and they married and had 3 beautiful children, my nieces and nephew. Oh, the joy they brought into my life. We became a proper family again, spending Christmases and summer holidays together. Leo and I, we never had another argument like that last one. We didn't need to. We had found a new respect for each other. Born from forgiveness and understanding, he became my closest friend. He passed away just 2 years ago, a happy man, surrounded by his family. I miss him every day, but the ache is a sweet one, filled with gratitude for the years we got back. And Arthur, well, about 10 years after he'd left for university, I received a letter. He was married, had a child on the way, and was a successful engineer living halfway across the country. He wrote that he had often thought of me and hoped I was happy. He said he hoped I had never stopped drawing. I wrote back and told him I was very happy and that I had a house full of sketches. We never wrote again after that. Our story had been a beautiful, hopeful first chapter, but it wasn't the whole book, and that's all right. Some loves are meant to be a foundation, not the entire house. My Frank, my dear, steady Frank, we had 30 wonderful years together before he passed. He was the quiet harbor I needed after so many stormy seas. He cherished my art, framing my best sketches and hanging them with pride. He loved Leo like a brother. He was a good, kind man. I was incredibly lucky to have loved twice in my life. Now, I'm an old woman, sitting in a quiet house with a ticking clock and a warm cup of tea. And when I hold this locket, I don't feel the weight of a burden anymore. I feel the weight of a life fully lived. I finally understand what that promise I made all those years ago was really about. You see, I thought the promise was about sacrifice. I thought it meant I had to give up my dreams to save my brother. For years, I carried that thought like a shield, but it was a shield that kept love out just as much as it kept pain in. I was so focused on what I had lost, my art, my future, that I couldn't see what I was building. The truth is, the promise wasn't to give up my life, it was to make a life, for both of us, out of the rubble. The real sacrifice isn't giving up who you are. The real sacrifice is clinging to a single version of your own happiness so tightly that you can't see the other forms it might take. My masterpiece was never going to be a painting hanging in a gallery. My masterpiece is the story I just told you. It's the forgiveness Leo and I found. It's the family that grew from our restored love. It's the understanding that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect futures. It's about showing up, day after day. It's about mending things when they break. It's about forgiveness, especially forgiving yourself. It's about having the courage to change, to admit you were wrong, to let go of bitterness and choose love instead, even when it's the hardest thing to do. This old locket is still empty. You know, I never did put a picture inside. I realized a long time ago that no single photograph could ever capture the journey it represents. Its value isn't in what it holds, but in what it has seen. It has seen a young girl's hope, a woman's despair, a sister's failure, and a family's redemption. So, if there's a lesson in this old woman's ramblings, my dear, it's this. Don't be afraid when life doesn't follow your blueprint. Sometimes, the most beautiful structures are built from the plans we're forced to write along the way. Be kind to yourself, forgive your mistakes, and understand that love, real love, is often quieter and more resilient than you think. It's not always a blazing fire. Sometimes, it's just a steady, ticking clock in the hall, a constant, comforting presence that sees you through the darkest nights. Now, how about another cup of tea? The rain has stopped. Look, you can see a bit of sun trying to peek through the clouds. Every storm passes, dear, every single one.